My name's David, and I was born and raised in the north of England, trained as an architect, and very soon after graduating I realized I was looking for something a lot deeper to put my energies into. When I joined Oroville, I knew, as much as I was attracted to this galaxy image and attracted to the possibilities of what Oroville seemed to be offering me as an architect, it was very clear to me on day one when I made the decision to join that I was joining to become an Orovillian and not to be an architect. The role of an architect isn't just building buildings. You're trying to imagine the environment around, whether that's the living environment, the built environment, whatever it might be. So we've been exploring various things, but I was focusing a lot more on that actually. It's got to the point where today I'm actually not doing any planning anymore at all. I'm actually involved in the Citizens' Assembly because I realized that unless we can empower the Residents' Assembly to make decisions, to even start questioning the status quo, the only way we can do that is actually through the Residents' Assembly, technically and legally. Dream catchers. We were meeting for about 3.5 years every week, and people could come, guests could come, newcomers could come, and the idea was to just hold space and hold the energy, and we had the galaxy image in the center of the circle, and we were meeting each week on a roof. So if we were looking at the international zone, we would move on different roofs in the international zone to try and call that energy. And so it's about not only just the idea of brainstorming, but also transcending even the idea of my dream for Oroville or your dream for Oroville, because it's mother's dream. So it's actually we're sitting there and trying to sort of move beyond the individual and tap into some kind of collective wisdom that was calling whatever it was mother saw when she was working with Roger on the different plans that eventually came up with the galaxy. And at the end of 2007, the first batch of money came for the road, which was one some people wanted to build. We just bought a new piece of land where the library is today, and they wanted to start putting the road in there towards Vicas Radial and towards Arca and the health center. And we'd realized from our sessions, and from also talking to various traffic experts that had come to visit Oroville over the years, that actually building the road in that moment was not necessarily the wisest thing to do, because unless you've got a very clear idea exactly why you want the road and who's going to be using the road, it will almost always end up with too much traffic and will not almost always end up not doing the thing you actually hoped it would do when you built it. So we came up with crownways, so I'll be going into that one a little more in detail. So obviously this is the image everybody hopefully knows. So you've got the industrial zone up here, you've got the international zone where we're sitting today. This is actually Bharat Nivas, so we're sitting roughly here in the Tibetan pavilion. Residential zone goes all the way from here to here, so it's obviously very high density in this area, coming through 5 sectors to the lowest density here. Just to give you orientation, roughly the solar kitchen is roughly here. And then lastly, we've got the cultural zone. Of course, we don't have a stadium, but the Deha Shakti sports area is roughly in that area. And the cultural zone swings in here and actually crosses what we're going to be talking about, the crown, which is this very sort of vague ring. And the cultural zone crosses this and actually comes and swings in here around the Matramandir and Matramandir Lake. The idea was and here is the administrative zone where we've got the town hall. Town hall is roughly here, and this sort of arc of buildings we started to build with the archives coming latest here. And the cultural zone was coming in here because the idea would be that kindergartens, the youngest children would be closest to the Matramandir, and the schools would overlook the lake and overlook the Matramandir itself. So those are the 4 zones. Each zone is separated by a park. This is what we're calling today the Bliss Park. Each park is named after one of the 4 qualities of the mother. But in this, what we're talking about today, the Bliss area is here, where the youth center has been built. So each zone separated by a park. And as you can see, actually here, the lake is not exactly a lake. It's a series of water bodies around the Matramandir. And today we're talking more about a lake. This is just part of the evolution of the ideas. So when we talk about the galaxy model, there were various stages of that. So this is one of the earliest images. This is actually from the model itself, where the lake is still in a number of different pieces, with different routes coming in towards the Matromandia. Today, I think there's still only just the one main axis coming in from this side. The rest of the lake, there's no other routes across the lake, I don't think at the moment. Other than the crown, one of the main things that you'll hear people talking about are lines of force. And that's these elements here. And also we've got basically a whole series in the residential zone, and we have a number in the in the industrial zone. The difference being that in the industrial zone, they rise up towards the Matromandia, so these are the highest points, whereas in the residential zone, they rise up away from the Matromandia. The only one we have today at the moment is Progress, and we only have the first part of it, just at the lowest point here. And if you hear people talking about the line of goodwill, that's basically the biggest one, which I think is almost a kilometer long, running like this. That doesn't mean that the kilometer has to be a building. Some people might think it is, some people might want to make it a kilometer long building, but in my discussions with Roger, and when I heard him talk about it, it was never necessarily one building. It's just a mass of buildings which create this. And it's also, all the terms I'm using, it's also important to bear in mind they're all actually translations from the French. So a line of force has a kind of a different connotation in English than it would a ligne de force in French. If a French person hears the phrase, they might have a different feeling towards it. And the same with the crown. I mean, la couronne, the crown. Even the crown road, as we refer to it today, when I tried to describe to Roger what the word road implies in English, he was actually a little bit shocked, because in French, the words he was using didn't imply what, for me, as a British-trained architect, road implies regarding traffic, movement, etc., etc. So this whole translation story in an international community is quite interesting as a challenge. It's very easy when we start sort of digging into the whole galaxy idea to go back, and of course we can read the agenda, we can read what Mother was saying to Sat-Prem, we can read various records of conversations that she had with Roger, etc. And that can give us some insight. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's quite well known that Mother, understandably, changed her mind fairly regularly. And a lot of people suggest that if she was still alive today, she'd be saying quite different things than she was 50 years ago, which is hardly surprising considering how the world has evolved and moved on in the last 50 years. And so we're in this tension between embracing what evolution has to offer and embracing movement of concept, etc., and holding on to the last thing that Mother said, or the last thing that Roger said. And there's a sort of, I think, an inherent human tendency to want to hold on to the last thing that was said and say, well, this is it. That's what we're going to do now. So that's part of the sort of tension that we're dealing with today. But from our side, we felt there were interesting lessons to be learned by going back to the beginning of the process that Roger and Mother undertook together to come to the galaxy. So there were a series of models, a series of designs that were made in that journey. The first one I don't have an image of, but it's not actually necessary. It was just a grid model. It was very boring, from my perspective, very easy to implement potentially as an architect or as an engineer. But apparently, when he came, he had I think this proposal and the grid model. And apparently, Mother didn't even want to look at the grid model. She just knew that's not the answer. I don't think she even looked at the drawings. She just pushed the book to the side, which is already quite interesting. So this was the nebula. Now, the nebula, it's kind of like, I find it very dynamic. And if you imagine in the late 60s wanting to come up with a futuristic design for a new international township, it's got that sort of explosive energy. It's kind of quite radical. There was nothing, and I think still is nothing like it on Earth. It's quite simply designed around the symbol, with the different gardens around the Matromandia and so on. And the symbol is defined by the roads. And you still, already in this earliest model, you get the idea with the cultural zone, something more like the international zone, and two different zones for living and working. And I think what fascinated me the first time I saw this was somebody like the mother who, she had a very strong artistic background, but she didn't have a particular training in planning or architecture or anything like that. And if I put myself in the role of a client asking for a town to be designed of an architect and a planner, and the architect comes along and puts this on the table, I think I would find it very difficult to say no. I wouldn't really know. It's kind of dynamic. I presume that the architect planner knows what they're doing. And I'm like, wow, okay, yeah, let's do it, you know. But something there made Mother feel, no, it's not going far enough. We need to push further. So then the next design, this is called the macrostructure model. Macrostructure, of course, we can start to see the beginning of what Roger was coming eventually with the lines of force. That one and this one. So in those days, in the late 60s, big was best. And sort of bringing people together in very consolidated spaces was one way that people felt to actually embrace the issues around ecology and the environment. Because even Paolo Soleri in America with Arcosanti was designing future cities where you bring human beings together very densely, that you give as much space as possible left for nature. So that this was very much in the air at the time. And again, we still see the 4 zones. And again, we can start to see how this curve is coming. We can if you feel from the previous one to the galaxy, the previous one was just straight line nebula. Here we can already start to see the curves, what we're today calling the radials, or the lines where the lines of force will come. And we can sort of start to feel more of an evolution around the sort of Matromandia idea with the lake, et cetera, et cetera. But Mother, apparently to this one, felt that these structures, obviously it would be great for somebody living here or living here if they want the view and the connection to the Matromandia, but it's not so great for somebody living here or working here. She felt that this sort of flow of energy and there's a blockage to the Matromandia. So again, she sent Roger away and said, let's try another one. This apparently, Roger brought this, I don't know if it was a few days, literally, or a few weeks before the inauguration ceremony in 1968. And so this is what, in the end, Mother felt was the right sort of, captured the right essence and the right energy. And this is what we've had since then to go by. The other thing I need to emphasize in this is, from a planning or an urban design point of view, this is a massing model. It's a kind of conceptual design. It's not designed to, let's say, take a bicycle pump and inflate it to the right scale and we just have exactly what's there live on the ground. It's not designed to be that. It's to give a sense, it's to give inspiration, it's to give a sense of sort of solid built areas to natural vegetative areas, flow, energy flow, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a conceptual model that's there to draw inspiration from. The master plan is a document which has a lot of text, which describes how we should be integrating the environment, how we should be doing lots of very nice green things like treating grey water and all this kind of stuff. Because the text is a wonderful way of explaining what we'd like to do without defining how we're going to do it, and is always a good excuse to avoid actually doing it on some level. You can hand the master plan to somebody and they'll read it and go, that's great, but what are we actually doing on the ground? For me, one of the unfortunate aspects of the master plan is one of the areas in which it goes into most detail are the roads. And it's interesting because if you take this model, firstly, you don't see any roads. You could say that's a road maybe, you could say that's a road maybe, but everywhere else there aren't any roads. And there's some, what I would then call paths around the Matromandia. It's pretty clear that that's not designed to be a racetrack. So why have we gone from the nebula to the macro model in his design process with Mother, where she pushed him to keep going, and then we end up with this, which actually, in the end, doesn't show any roads? I find that a very interesting shift that happened in that design process. Again, bearing in mind this is a concept, And obviously what was envisaged in 1968 is obviously going to be interpreted very differently today. But we can see quite a lot of water bodies, not just the lake itself. And if you probably can't make it out on this image, I don't know, but if you look on the model, there is actually a water channel going around the crown. Now, I don't doubt that Mother loved Venice, but I don't imagine that she was imagining a Venice on a hill in south of India. But the way I've interpreted this is to say, well, it was pretty clear even in the early days, also from a lot of Roget's more detailed designs in architecture, that water catchment was going to be a fairly major topic. So we don't necessarily, let's not talk about the lake specifically, but certainly whatever these channels might be and these pools might be, this was hinting at the need for water catchment. And what does that mean? How do we interpret that? How do we manifest that on the ground? So these are the kind of things that Dreamcatchers were looking at and the kind of things that we were trying to begin to integrate in the Crownways proposal. And the Crownways proposal, as I said, emerged almost as a reaction, or as a reaction actually, to the proposal of starting the road. So I was talking about the crown, and there's nothing in the Galaxy model to suggest Crown Road. The Crown Road emerges in the master plan. The master plan document is specifying ways to move forwards. And roads is I would say it's almost too easy. When the comment I like to make when Mother finally saw this, I like to imagine her with a twinkle in her eye saying, well, that will keep them busy. Because if we're here for human unity and we're here to try and figure out the complexities of what it is to be a human being on this planet with a bunch of other human beings, then this plan is a nightmare to get there. Like if this doesn't do it, nothing will. Because there's no straight lines, everything's connected to everything else. There's no easy solution to this. If she would have wanted an easy solution, she would have picked the first one that I don't even have an image of because it was so easy, or she would have picked the nebula. Potentially she could have gone with the macro, but this is the worst thing to choose if you want to have an easy solution. So we're here to keep digging, and we're here to keep working together, and we're here to try and figure out what on earth does this mean. So when we come to the crown, you can see it's already difficult. Like here, it's fairly easy to define what area is the crown. The moment we get into this area, well, where do you draw this line? Where do you draw this line? I don't know, but that's the point. It's a fairly amorphous thing, and it's meant to evolve over time with us as we evolve as a collective. So here's an incredibly hazy, grainy 2007 Google Earth image. Already we have, back then, the solar kitchen, center guest house, Surrender, Arca, Kailash. This is the road down to Certitude. You can already see the crown road. I'm being very specific in how I define that. It's the Crown Road. Although it wasn't paved, it was just a dirt track at that time. You can see a little bit of crown, which we have today, also paved up here, but it wasn't paved then either. Here's CSR, etc., etc. As I said, from this junction, from Certitude heading this way, today the library is here, but when this image was taken, this land didn't belong to Oroville, and it was buying that piece of land that triggered the whole idea of starting the road, or the capacity even, of connecting and building this paved road here. So based on what we'd learned up till that point and the information we'd got from traffic planners, we felt if we focus on this area to come up with an alternative that for us goes more in the direction of the Galaxy model and not the master plan, that's the difference between the two as far as I'm concerned, this, from a traffic point of view, is a dead end. There's no through traffic. The moment you try and create a new ambience of any kind of new town that you want to develop and a sense of urban space, the difficulty you have from day one is you've got all that traffic moving through all the time. So you can't, you're setting out with so many blockages to help you find that final solution. Whereas here, if we already have the gate on the road towards the solar kitchen, and if there would be a security there, this whole area, I mean this, wow, this is not easy to see. Basically, the route, I think this might be the road to visitors center. So basically from there all the way through here, you could develop that whole area and explore new ways of being together in an urban environment. So traffic could drive in, park on the outside, you could have a pedestrian, cycle, electric experience and start to sort of explore what sort of buildings, how close, how high, what sort of environment does Oroville want to be. So that's the area we picked. As I said already, we've got solar kitchen, New Portus, Centre Guest House, Kailash, and you can already see from the Certitude Road, you can already see this has already been started as a road. This, I think, is ultimately designed to be one of the radial roads. So what we did, when we focused in on that area, we took a photo close in on that galaxy model that I was showing you earlier. So this is like a zoomed in version. And again, it's a massing model, conceptual, not meant to be taken literally, but gives a sense of scale, gives a sense of solid to void, mass, green, etc., etc. So by abstracting that, so this would be space, trees, whatever. These are the lines of force. This is the crown. And this brownish line, just to show you how things evolve even in that time, from the original master plan from 1968, that was the outline that they specified the crown, and the model itself sort of varies around that. So it's, again, just to show you that it's not meant to be taken literally. And this would then be a center line of the crown. Bearing in mind the Banyan is the technical center of Oroville, not the Matramandia. So we just started by going on the site and just seeing, well, what's there? So obviously we've got the existing roads. This is the one that was being proposed. Paths, cycle paths, etc., etc. And one of the things that we'd been studying in the galaxy model, when one looks at things from an urban design point of view within towns or cities, we're obviously looking at natural features, if there's a river running through a city or something like that, but we're also looking, if it's a designed town like Oroville, how do we integrate the various geometries within the design? One of the geometries in the galaxy, centered, this geometry is on the Matramandia. You've got the axes of the Matramandia. So if you imagine that you've got the 12 petals, and if you draw a line from the center of the Matramandia between each petal and extend it to the crown, you effectively get a clock face, 12 lines from the Matramandia to the outside crown. So that's what these are. That's one level of geometry. Then we have what we're today calling the radials, so whether it's roads or whether it's the lines of force which follow the lines of those roads, those radials. That's the third geometry. So you've got these three different geometries. And what's really interesting about the crown is that this is where these geometries come together. Okay? This is quite a different energy and quite a different flow than this kind of energy. And you've also got an energy of this crown which is connecting the four zones. So Oroville is a very unique place in the sense that we've taken a spiritual heart, a spiritual center, the Matramandia, and then we've created an urban ring around it. Historically, both in India and in Europe, temples or cathedrals would be the center of a town, and then the marketplace would come next to that, and the town would grow up around it, and that sort of sacred center, that sacred building, would become part and parcel of the day-to-day life of the town in a very lived way. Whereas in Oroville, the area around the Matramandia has even been called the peace area. Like the idea is that we're doing the opposite. So it's an incredible challenge from an urban design point of view to say, well, what is that distributed center going to look like? It's 4.4 kilometers around the crown. It takes about 1 hour exactly to walk it if it would be easily walked. What does that look like? How does that feel? So the next thing we did, other than just the paths, we were going on the site, a lot of the trees and the existing vegetation, but within the Oroville area, we went and we picked out features. So for instance, anywhere you go in lowland Tamil Nadu, you'll find these beautiful lines of palmyras in the landscape. And they kind of grew up naturally on the dividing lines between the fields of different farms. And palmyras are very easily self-seeded. As the nungus drop, you get more and more palmyras. So it's a very distinctive feature in the landscape. There was a nice clump of kaya trees here. There was a very nice, probably still is a very nice clump of bamboos over here. We've got the central banyan in the middle of Centre Guest House. And there are two smaller banyans, which also, I say smaller, they're still big, on either side. So we were picking out sort of natural features in the landscape. We were working with Marie, who's a landscape architect. She's presently working in Botanical Garden. Just generally superimpose these geometries. And as I mentioned, the cultural zone swings in on the far side in the northeast and comes in front of the Matramandir. And the park between cultural zone and residential zone also swings in here. This is already a big question. What are these parks? Is a park more like a botanical garden type of park where you walk through it and there is a tree over here and a tree over there and a pond or a lake in the middle? Or is it more tropical dry evergreen forest, which is the native species indigenous to this area and more kind of in the forest direction? So this is already a big topic because the way the galaxy's formed, it's giving a lot of opportunity to create relatively small-scale wildlife corridors through Oroville. So that Oroville becomes sort of this weaving together of the human and the natural. We were leaning more in the direction of tropical dry evergreen forest. We also had the feeling that if all these areas of green, even the bits in between the buildings, if that was all manicured, tended garden, the 50,000 Orovillians that we're destined supposedly to have would all be gardeners, because that's pretty much, we'd need to be putting all that energy into just maintaining the landscape. So we were saying, well, let a lot of it be wild. Why not? So that's the park coming from the cultural zone. This is actually the extension of Bliss coming in around here. And we were saying let there also be kind of these wild areas in between the lines of force. So when if you're living on the third, fourth floor of the line of force, and you're just looking out into forest, effectively. So it's bringing one of the phrases we liked to play with was, of course, we've got the whole idea within the integral yoga of supramental. We were playing on that, and we were saying, well, what would an urbanism look like that would be supra-urban? Because in the old days, let's say in the 18th and early 19th centuries, 19th and early 20th centuries, you would have a city or a town, and you'd have the countryside. After the Second World War, planners, especially in North America, and it's slowly spread also to Europe, developed the idea of suburbia. And suburbia was originally designed to give the residents the benefit of both a town environment and a country, nature environment. And a lot of people would argue today that the suburbia was actually sub. It was low. It didn't actually give you either. You didn't really get the benefits of nature, and you didn't really get the benefits of a town. And we get all the ecological difficulties around traffic, mobility, and things like this. When I first came to Oroville, I was quite strongly against the whole idea of lines of force. For me, it was kind of like, there are lots of things in the galaxy which one could argue are very 1960s approaches to planning. And planning itself has moved on since then. I've since reached the point where, quite some while ago, where I felt Mother was onto something when she wanted the 4 zones. Not from a classic 60s planning point of view, more from a yogic, energetic point of view, that you're creating different focuses of energy in each of those zones. And also Oroville, a town of 50,000 people, I'm not going to start discussing numbers, let's just stick with 50,000 for now, is small enough that the amount of movement between those 4 zones is not so crazy, and it's not like it's not like going from East Chennai to West Chennai to go to a concert and then go to North Chennai to work and back to South Chennai to live. I mean, if everybody was doing that in Chennai all the time, it would be completely crazy. But on the scale of Oroville, I think it's quite manageable, and it would anyway bring life to the crown. Because if everybody's simply sitting in their place in one area and not moving, the crown itself won't come to life. So there's some interesting dynamics going on there. So once we've got the existing vegetation, what we were then saying was, well, we've got these 12 axes crossing the crown. We have the opportunity, like here we've integrated this existing banyan, and we create a little plaza or a square. And here at the east end of the solar kitchen, we could do the same thing between the axis and the radial. And if each of these, we added an extra one here just from a design point of view. If we say that if there would be mobility, let's say public transport of some sort, could be a bus shuttle in each direction. If those buses are moving around in each direction, I said it's 4.4 kilometers all the way round, an hour. So if you've got that clock face, you've got 5-minute walk from this square to this square. So if you've got a bus stop here and a bus stop here, and you're caught somewhere in the middle, you've got a maximum 2.5 minute walk to go in either direction to catch the bus, just as one example. So you can already see that we're trying to move away from the idea of a road, a linear circle, and coming back to what's in the original galaxy model, that the crown is a living, breathing part of the Oroville urban structure. So we then added these smaller spaces, for instance, made another little square around the existing bamboo grove here. And we've also, I didn't mention that earlier, we're bringing in, when I mentioned this idea about this being tropical dry evergreen forest and a little bit more wild, we've picked certain areas at the base of the lines of force, for instance, and here around these existing kayas, to say that we could be bringing in little park landscapes which are tended, which do get water, which have flowers. So, but we're picking those out very specifically, that where there could be a strong congregation of people in those areas. Obviously, however many people might be living in this line of force, if they're moving in this direction to come to the crown, they will all be benefiting of moving either from on the roof down into this garden or along the sides and joining the crown itself. So we're picking places where one would imagine there would be a certain movement of people. So then, linking these squares, this plaza, this one, little squares in between, linking them together, and again, playing on the geometries. One of the problems with having these radials, all the movement is obviously going in this direction. So we need little sub-routes. Like if I'm sitting here, if I'm here and I want to go here, I don't want to have to go necessarily to the crown and then go all the way here. So people by default will be creating these little routes. And how we manage those, how they emerge over time in the urban fabric is one of the questions. We've also kept the radials, and we've said, okay, if whatever our town plan is, however we want to manifest the galaxy, ideally it should be highlighting our own ideals. The galaxy should be manifesting the inner ideals of the community in the external world. So we said, okay, if we do emphasize these radials and we emphasize that geometry as roads or as paths, then they should clearly be only for alternative transport. So at this point, we were just saying, this is obviously looking into the future, but we're even saying in the course of the development, any polluting vehicle, diesel, petrol, whatever, I'm aware that electric is also polluting in its own way, but that those vehicles do not move on the main axes. We've also highlighted these axes from the Matramandia. We were imagining the possibility that we've made them white. We were imagining the possibility of actually creating almost like a new, mixing in quartz or something like that with the road surface and having paths in certain, maybe not all 12, maybe literally paths on the 4 main axes, but the rest, the other axes could be lines of sight where the trees are kept trimmed, that as you come around the crown, you get a glimpse of the Matramandia on each axis. And potentially you could be crossing literally a quartz line that again, as you move across it, it's reminding you of where the Matramandia is. Just playful, just imagining ways of dealing with that. I hope you can start to sort of feel the movement in the direction of that original galaxy model in its own way, taking existing features into account. And so the reason that the proposal is called Crown Ways, if it hasn't become clear already, there isn't a crown road. There are crown ways, and they cross, and they interlink, and they weave together, in this case, the residential zone, but would be similar in the other 3 zones, and the inside of Oroville. It's the idea of moving away from a road as a means to get from A to B as quickly as possible, and to actually come to crown ways or other ways where it's a living environment where Orovillians can be and there isn't overwhelming traffic. One idea that came up at the time, we weren't in that moment aware of something called shared space, but we discovered it as we ourselves were exploring the idea, would be that once you've managed to eliminate petrol and diesel vehicles to the outside, there would obviously be exceptions at certain times of the day for delivery or something like that. It's always possible. But generally speaking, this paved area, there would be no distinction or difference made between pedestrian, cycle, or an electric bike. This whole idea of shared space, it might sound a little bit crazy, but they've already explored it in Holland and in Denmark quite extensively. And they found out that in many cases, even on relatively busy intersections in towns in those countries, when they take away all the barriers between the pavement and the road, they take away the step between the road and the pavement, they take away the signage. They'll give you a sign saying this way to wherever, but they'll take away all the signage of speed signage, all the signage saying slow down, warning, keep an eye out. They'll take away the zebra crossings on the ground for the pedestrians. They'll take it all away. And the accident rate plummets. There's almost no accidents. Because if you're a car driver and you're on your road and you suddenly come to an area and all the signs have gone, everything that you're used to has disappeared, and you're suddenly driving into this area, you slow right down. And there are people cycling, walking, moving in all kinds of directions. You have to pay super careful attention to the speed that you're driving, where you're driving, how you're driving. And it's been fully tested over decades. The accident rate has plummeted every single time. There isn't an exception. Not that I'm aware of. So this was the idea. And actually, I often joke, shared space is pretty much what you get in India wherever you go anyway. So it's kind of like just accepting what is and saying, well, let's integrate it and let's try and make it livable and not more and more traffic and more pollution. So then, as we start to move up, we've defined these areas of shared space, of paving. So the gray is potentially building. That does not mean, again, from this massing model, from the galaxy model, that does not mean that that is a building. But it is a space within which buildings can come. So if an architect and a client come to the town planners and say, we have a project and we want to do this, and it should be 3 floors, and it should have these functions, they could be given an area, and they know they're facing a forest here, they're facing a radial of electric traffic here, and they have a park here, and they can design the building according to those and according to the sun and the wind and the rain and everything else. And that will evolve over time. So it's an evolving approach, it's an evolving design. So this, on the first floor, also the idea, so like what you see here could eventually be something like this. So you actually get thinner buildings on the side and a raised square on the first or the second floor, so that the people living or working on the first or second floor also get a sort of semi-public, not fully public like on the ground floor, but they get spaces for interaction, meetings. It could be covered by tensile tent structures or whatever it might be. It's similar to what we see here on the first floor of the solar kitchen, where the La Terrace is. Again, a level up, second floor, so we start to see the lines of force. Yes, you can go to the next one. The lines of force are rising. Everything else probably, I mean, it will vary depending on where it is, but around the crown, I'm guessing ground +2 maybe in height. In some places, ground +1, to give that sense of an urban space. Also, we need to be addressing shade. We're living in the tropics. Summer temperatures +40 degrees, so we need to find ways to give enough shade to the areas, keep the wind flow moving, etc., which is also where you see the buildings constantly being broken up to allow the wind through. That would also need to happen on the lines of force, of course. So in this one, what we start to see here, I'm coming to the water now, just to give an example of designing in the line of the galaxy model with the future in mind. This was our proposal to say living wastewater treatment systems that aren't just a little box over there in the trees, but that the living wastewater system is also designed as part of the galaxy model. Actually, it's something that many people point out is, why the galaxy model? The only way you're ever going to benefit from seeing it is if you're a bird or if you're flying over in an aeroplane. So we took that on as a challenge, and we said, okay, well, what can we do with the galaxy model that you actually start to feel it when you're actually walking around? That was where we came partly with the idea for these axes, but also to say that if you do have a series of buildings rising up as lines of force, the concave side, that's the concave side, that's the convex side. If you would stand here, the building is curving away from you, so you won't see it. If you're standing here, from a perspective point of view, the building's disappeared. You might get a glimpse as it goes up in the distance, but you don't get such a strong sense of the line. If you're standing here, if you've got enough space between the edge of the building and this line of trees, you'll actually get a sense of that curve and that line of force kind of movement much more easily. So we said, okay, let's use that space and put the wastewater treatment systems in, which are, if they're living systems, they need sunlight, because the sunlight is being used to also help clean the water in many cases. So that's just one kind of design feature, how those elements could be integrated. So I think one of the biggest steps we took with this circle, we said, okay, I have to emphasize at the beginning, Dreamcatchers, the main focus of Dreamcatchers was not just to look at how the galaxy model could manifest whatever it was that Mother and Roger saw together, but also, even back then in 2007, how can we start to reconcile and bring together the two polarities in Oroville? The people wanting the city, the people in the greenbelt. So we were really, that was kind of in the background as we were working on this, trying to build bridges, effectively, and find ways that win-win-win situations. So one of those, if we take that circle, some people were saying that this circle is really important. That from a symbolic point of view, that it has an energy in that perfect circle that we need to maintain. I don't know. I'm willing to accept the possibility. If we say that's true, do we want that incredibly powerful symbolic energy that we need is a road? Does that kind of stand for what we came here for? Of course, we came here for all kinds of different things and much higher things, but in a very basic, practical way, do we want that the road, the Crown Road, epitomizes everything, like it's all the circle. All this energy is being put on this circle. We need the circle. Is that really the best thing we can come up with? So what we said was, well, okay, let's flip that. If we're here in an area, we've got climate change happening. We notice it in the last few years, even in Oroville. We need to catch as much rainwater as possible. This is roughly the highest point on the Crown. And the other side of the Crown, somewhere in Darkali, is about 10 meters lower than this side of the Crown. So over 2.2 kilometers in each direction, we have roughly a 10-meter drop as you go around the Crown. So we figured, let's use that drop, let's create a water channel. Initially, it could just be dug, doesn't have to be super pucker, but over time, if you look at many of the cities in the world, it's more in the past than in the present, but it's happening today as well. A lot of money was often put into public infrastructure and public works, and we still use them today. So a lot of the, like in London, the Victorian solutions for for waste and sewage, the whole what's called the embankment along the edge of the Thames today was built as a solution to channel that water, not have it go into the Thames, and take it off in large tunnels to sewage treatment plants. And that embankment, everybody walks along it every day today, looks down into the Thames, and it's a beautiful walking there is a road as well, but there's also a beautiful walking environment. So the money that we invest in these kind of solutions has long-term knock-on effects. So I could actually see the potential, even if this was fairly rough at the beginning, that eventually it could be paved, it could have little waterfalls, it could have little pools, and it will all be dry in the middle of the summer, covered by trees, and you could sit there and have a sandwich in the middle of the day because you're under shade and the wind's coming through. And then suddenly, every time there's a rain, or in the middle of the monsoon, the whole thing comes to life. And all the water is flowing off the roofs and across the hard landscape, being gathered into this channel, and is flowing through the sink. So the whole thing comes alive, and we're celebrating rain. We're celebrating catching the rain. So obviously, we don't just want all that rain galloping around the crown and disappearing off into Darkali necessarily. So then we said, fine, let's take each of these sections of little sort of pieces of pie, if you like, got 12 pieces of pie centered on each of the petals of the Matramandia. Now, to link the energy of the Matramandia and some of the design ideas that are happening around the Matramandia, we were saying, well, how can we link those, again, find ways to link to the center? Each petal has a quality. Each garden beyond the petal has a quality. And those qualities, Mother often associated with specific flowers. So one idea was that in this area, on the crown, the flowers that are planted in the collective areas could link to the qualities of the Matramandia. The other thing we were saying was that between each of these axes, the geometries of the water bodies that are made could vary. So here we have circles on this side. Here we have these lines. Just a concept. It's not specifically designed to be like that. And here we have squares. So again, that you know when you're walking, you've crossed this white line, you're walking through here, into this square, into whatever, and as you're crossing these, the geometry and the shape and the size of these things is often subconsciously in helping you understand where are you at that moment on the crown, as you're moving around the crown. And so last but not least, as far as rainwater catchment goes, of course, these bodies would also be potentially hard landscape and wouldn't be full of water all the time. If you channel rainwater and you channel it into a water body and you want it to stand there as a water feature, the difficulty, of course, is very quickly it evaporates as soon as the rain stopped and the sun comes out. So this would be something that we'd need to figure out. Do we shade them in some way? Do we say, as the rain happens, that thing is filled for a few days, and then there's a sluice gate, and whatever water is there can then run through, and like we have then percolation areas in the forest where that rainwater is channeled to actually percolate down into the ground and replenish the aquifers under the ground. Another option would simply be, there is various of our water experts are also suggesting that we actually need to be collecting the water to actually be used. If it's come from the sky and we've collected it, it has certain difficulties. If it's been mixed with pollutants and so forth, if you allow it to percolate down into the aquifer, those layers of clay and ground levels clean the water over probably decades in many cases. The problem with that is, as I'm sure if you're getting a talk from any of the water experts, the aquifers on which Oroville stands obviously go way beyond the boundary of Oroville. So by recharging, we're on a little hill about 50 meters high. If we collect all the rainwater and we percolate it down into the aquifers, then all the farming agriculture around Oroville is getting their aquifers recharged, and they're using that. You could also argue, well, the farmers are using it to grow food and things like this, which is important, which of course it is. Unfortunately, since I live in Oroville, there has been a political decisions a long time ago that pumping water is free. So if a farmer can afford to put a pump, the government will not charge you for any kind of agriculture, they will not charge you for the water use, either obviously for the quantity of water, nor for the electricity that you're using to do it. That was a great support for farmers. Unfortunately, long-term effect was the farmers then were much more encouraged to plant cash crops, so crops that you wouldn't normally plant in this climate, but if they can they can flood irrigate and they can grow casuarina trees and things like this and sell it very quickly. And so the aquifer levels are going down, down, down very fast, and no government in Chennai dares to change the policy because they'll never get voted in again. So we're in kind of interesting binds as far as that goes. If there was this initial 60 lakh at that time to build the stretch of road, I think it was already from the library area right the way through to Arca, we were saying let's use whatever we can of that 60 lakhs, define the crown way spaces that we want to create. Maybe not all these little subroutes, but at least let's pave the small squares and plazas and things like this and link them. And defining potential building blocks of the future that would help as they evolve to define the spaces themselves. And in that vein, we were also suggesting that these blocks could then be planted by casuarina trees which wouldn't be flood irrigated, because casuarina, it gives a nice wall of green, so you can walk between them and feel already the future as it might be a building. And the casuarina, when it's harvested, is used often for scaffolding for building. So here we are back to this. So that was kind of a little glimpse, a little deep dive into what that area might look like. And I'll end on this. I often think of Venice when I think of Oroville, not from the point of view of the canals, obviously, but what interests me about Venice, if anybody who's read a little bit, traveled a little bit, looked at documentaries on television, whatever, if you mention Venice, everybody has an image of what Venice is looking like, with the canals, with a certain architecture, etc., etc. And I kind of imagine if you would take somebody like that and be able to teleport them blindfold into the middle of Venice, take the blindfold off, that very, very quickly, walking around after a few minutes, if not immediately, they would probably guess I'm in Venice. Like, it's so distinctive. So my dream for Oroville is that however we get there and whatever we choose to do, Mother's dream would be so powerful that by the end of it, if you did the same thing in Oroville in 100 years' time, for somebody who's read a lot and looked at documentaries and has a sense of the world, if they were transported into the middle of Oroville blindfold and the blindfold was removed, I would like to think that they could feel the same immediate connection and understanding of where they are in the world as they would in Venice. That's it. Last.